Welcome. Thanks for coming towards the end of the day for your interest in Power BI Report Server. Power BI Report Server is a new product that we just launched to general availability today. And it is an on-premises solution that gives you self-service BI as well as enterprise reporting. The enterprise reporting piece is built on SQL Server Reporting Services. So it is a marriage of the cool, exploratory, interactive Power BI visualization technology with the enterprise server platform of SQL Server Reporting Services, or SSRS. So my name is Ricardo Muti. I'm a group program manager working for the last little while on SQL Server Reporting Services, but now, of course, working on Power BI Report Server as well. So what we'll do today is we'll give you an overview of what Power BI Report Server is. This is a 200-level session, so it's meant to introduce you to Power BI Report Server. If you've read about it at length, maybe you'll get a question or two answered today, but a lot of this might be a review for you. This is really meant to introduce people who haven't heard too much about it yet or have a lot of questions about it to understand what Power BI Report Server is. It's a jumping off point. We'll do a quick demo to give you a flavor of the product, but if you really want to get a sense of all of the things you can do in, say, Power BI Desktop or Power BI Mobile, there are other sessions, some of which have already happened, unfortunately, like the previous session in this room, but you can go and check out the recordings. They're available on YouTube pretty quickly. So we'll do an overview of what Power BI Report Server is. We'll talk about how do you get it now that it is generally available. That's definitely a hot topic with lots of questions. And then we'll look at the product and its capabilities through two lenses. One is through the lens of the end user, who's going to be using the web portal to view reports and interact with reports, as well as the business data analyst type user who is going to be creating reports or editing reports. And then because this is an on-premises server platform especially, we're going to be looking at it from the IT pro perspective or the IT decision maker perspective. If you want to get this to support your business users, what does that look like? What does deployment look like? What does configuration look like? What do you need to know? And toward the end, we'll touch on some scenarios of just when you might use Report Server versus other options for your reporting needs. And hopefully we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So just a little bit more intro about myself. I've been at Microsoft for 7 years. I originally joined the SQL Server Reporting Services team. But it's funny, throughout the entire time that I've been at Microsoft, I've been working on SSRS or Power BI in some name or another, in some form or another. So I joined the reporting services team, but they were actually working on a new V1 product, which is called Project Crescent. Does anybody know what Project Crescent evolved into? You work here, so yes, you should know. Anybody who doesn't work at Microsoft? Nobody? Wow, that is a better kept secret than I thought. Project Crescent became PowerView. Now, dare I ask, does anybody know what PowerView was? Yes, okay, that got us a little further. So PowerView was a Silverlight-based, and we all know how popular Silverlight is today, so that was a decision that really paid off. A Silverlight-based data exploration experience. In the web, you could drag and drop fields and build beautiful data visualizations. We took it to the cloud. We took it to HTML5. We took it to mobile. So it was a good start, but it evolved into what you see today as the data visualization in Power BI. So I worked on that and then sort of evolved it into Power BI. And then a couple years ago, I came back to focus more on SQL Server Reporting Services to say, what can we do with that in the SQL Server 2016 release? How can we modernize it? I gave a session this morning about the more traditional SSRS reports optimized for document generation and printing. So I work on that as well. But I guess the last project that I worked on has been the most fun and the most interesting, where I thought you have these two great technologies. You have this server platform, this enterprise-grade reporting platform, and you have this cool stuff in Power BI, but there are a bunch of customers who, while they anticipate using the cloud at some point, they have some needs for an on-premises solution today. We combine these two things, and we've got a great on-premises solution. There are some ways that you can keep in touch with me, Twitter, LinkedIn, and I blog on the Reporting Services team blog. And I guess going forward, we'll be blogging a little bit more on the Power BI blog as well. So let's start with an overview of what Power BI Report Server is. This is how we think about Power BI. It is a comprehensive solution for analytics and business intelligence. It can connect to any data. So although it is a service that's born in the cloud, it is not limited to connecting to just cloud data. It certainly can connect to a lot of cloud data. And it makes it really easy if you're using Dynamics 365 or other Microsoft or non-Microsoft cloud services, then Power BI connects to those out of the box without you having to do a lot of complicated configuration. So that's sort of the nice benefit of using software as a service in the cloud. But it certainly does have hybrid connectivity capabilities where it can connect to data on premises through something called the on-premises data gateway. It's like a little agent utility that you install. There's a version that's a personal version that you can install on a laptop or a PC. And there is also an enterprise version that you can install and even, at this time, even scale out and have a high availability solution. And that will allow Power BI and other services from Microsoft in the cloud to reach back securely and connect to these on-premises data sources. It doesn't require you opening up anything through your firewall or anything. It's pretty slick technology that allows you to open up this secure tunnel. And then once you've got your data in Power BI, whether it's from the cloud, on-premises, or a mix of the two, you can create reports using Power BI Desktop and publish them to the service. There's all sorts of accelerators for you to start quickly. If you're using certain services, there are templates that allow you to quickly get a bunch of reports and a bunch of things already stitched together. It's got an additional feature that it calls dashboards. We use dashboard in a general sense, like if you're looking at a bunch of charts on the screen, we call it a dashboard. So sometimes people will call what they create in Power BI Desktop a dashboard. But Power BI uses the term more specifically for you take visuals from a bunch of different reports and even things from the web or outside of reports from Excel spreadsheets, and you can sort of collect them all, pin them all to what it calls a dashboard, and you can even have real-time data pushed to that dashboard and streaming. So it's actually moving almost like you're getting a pulse of your business from this dashboard. So that's the live dashboards feature. It's got other innovative features as well. I mean, this is sort of our playground where we're experimenting with the latest and greatest features in the cloud. So natural language, there's a feature called Q&A, question and answer. You can type in a question in natural language, in English, and now I believe even in Spanish, and get an answer based on the interpretation of your question and what it knows about your data. So if it recognizes names in your data that are names of tables or fields in your data sets, it will start giving you answers in the form of tables and charts, and really cool feature. And one of the really cool features about Power BI is that the visualization stack is open. So you're not limited to the chart types that we have in Power BI. There's any developer can go and build on our stack to build a custom visualization that works in Power BI Desktop and works in the Power BI service. So this is just a summary, some of the features that are available in Power BI. And then you can view it in any web browser. We have mobile apps, native mobile apps for all of the major mobile device platforms. And then people can view this, and users can view this through those apps, or you can actually embed Power BI within your own apps if you like. So that's a little bit of a view about Power BI. Now, Power BI Report Server, where that comes in relative to the Power BI service in the cloud, is that it's really extending our journey of giving customers more flexibility in terms of being able to deploy some of their workloads on premises behind their firewall. So I talked about the on-premises data gateway. When we first came out with Power BI, it could only connect to cloud data. And we were one of the first in the industry to innovate this hybrid cloud capability where you install this agent and it can connect back on-prem. So now you've got your dashboards and your reports and your presentation layer running in the cloud. But you've got your data residing on-prem, and there's a connectivity between the two. We have tons of customers using that. At the same time, there are some customers saying, hey, I have some reports that even the presentation layer, I need to run the whole thing on-prem. It could be because of laws and regulations that just say it must be so, at least today. It could be because of company policies. It could just be because of their own preferences or comfort right now, while they figure out what their strategy or their roadmap for going to the cloud in the future. So for whatever reason, we want to give customers that flexibility. You can have everything running in the cloud. You can have your presentation layer running in the cloud and reaching back on-prem securely. Or for some reports, you can just run them on-prem. Maybe you choose to run your finance department on-prem or something like that. So you can deploy this in a mixed environment along with using the Power BI service, or you could just be using Power BI Report Server today. Totally up to you. So Power BI Report Server allows you to run the reports on-prem. They connect to data on-prem. Because you're connecting from on-prem, you do not need the on-premises data gateway. And the other nice thing is because we chose to build it on SSRS, it is an SSRS server, and it is compatible with SSRS as well. It does support the built-in visuals, the same one as Power BI, as well as custom visuals. So So looking at that a little bit more, you can keep your Power BI reports on-prem. You build them in desktop. You publish them to the server. It is 100% compatible with SSRS because, in effect, it is SSRS. It is a superset of SSRS is another way to think about it. And you can move to the cloud on your terms in the sense that this has the best of both worlds in that it is a fully 100% on-premises solution, but it is part of a platform that is really innovating in the cloud and that allows you to take any investments you make today in terms of building reports and move those to the cloud. So if you're building a report in Power BI Desktop, that same report can be uploaded to the Power BI service and it will work there. If it's connecting to on-prem data, it means you might need to install the on-premises data gateway, which you would have needed to do anyways to connect from the cloud. But you can start on-prem today and gradually move things to the cloud. So it's a platform you can bet on, which is an important thing because we hear from a lot of customers who are in this sort of tough spot where the laws and regulations and policies are such that today, literally today, they need an on-premises solution. But they can also foresee a 6-month or 12-month or 18-month or even 5-year roadmap, whatever it is for their industry or company, where they know that they are tasked with, as the CIO or IT manager, coming up with a plan and a strategy for how they move to the cloud. So this allows them to do both of those things. The type of reports that you can build with Power BI Report Server now are these very interactive, exploratory sort of reports. So if you're familiar with Power BI Desktop, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But you have this variety of visuals. You can do all sorts of slicing and dicing. There's sophisticated filter capabilities, so you can filter at various scopes. You can filter an individual visual. You can filter a whole page, or you can even filter an entire report across pages. There's all the normal analytical capabilities that you would expect. Sorting, you can click on something and it will cross-filter the other charts and visuals on the page. You can be looking at summary level data like this and then drill down, even drill to the underlying row by row data. They just showed in an earlier session some of the enhancements they're making to drill where you can drill to any other field in your data set. So this is a flavor of the sort of capabilities that you have in these reports. Plus, they are iterating at a very rapid pace. So every month, there's a blog post that says, here's what's new in Power BI Desktop this month. And it's lots of good stuff like this. I mentioned it's compatible with SSRS. Again, I cannot overemphasize the point enough that a Power BI report server is an SSRS report server. How many of you use SSRS in your organizations? OK, lots of you. OK, great. So you do not need a Power BI report server and a separate SSRS server necessarily. You're welcome to do that and have them coexist. If you want to isolate one type of report on one environment and your self-service BI in a different environment, you can do that. But we certainly have customers interested in consolidating and saying, I want one web portal where my end users can go and they see all the reports, the nice interactive ones, the ones that they can publish themselves using Power BI Desktop, but also the corporate standard system of record reports that we use to run our business. So you can do that. You can view those reports in the web browser. If you've used SSRS 2016 and you create KPIs or even the DataZen-based mobile reports, those continue to work as well and work in the Power BI mobile app. So again, no two web portals, no two mobile apps. It's all one mobile app. And finally, it's an enterprise-ready solution, and it's familiar. If you're using SSRS today, you're familiar with, I go to this web portal. It's a traditional folder structure. I can organize my reports in the folder structure. I can manage permissions at a very granular level based on role and inherited throughout this folder structure. All of that, if you're familiar with that in SSRS, you'll find this very familiar. It's the exact same way that you do it in Power BI Report Server. So how do you get this Power BI Report Server? There are actually a couple of different ways. First of all, you have to license the server capacity, which is based on processor cores. If you're licensing the physical server, then you have to license all of the physical cores on the server. If you're licensing a virtual, what they call a virtual OSE, a virtual operating system environment, effectively a VM, then you have to license all of the virtual processor cores on that VM. That's exactly the way that works today with SQL Server. So you can choose either of those two, whole physical server or a VM. But where do you get those core-based licenses from? So the main way that you can get it is from Power BI Premium. Everybody familiar with Power BI Premium now from today's sessions and announcements? So it is a capacity-based licensing model rather than a user-based licensing model. So I can subscribe, and it's a subscription model as well. So I can subscribe, for example, to Power BI Premium P1 for a fixed amount every month, and I get 8 cores of capacity. But the bonus is that you don't get just 8 cores of dedicated capacity in the cloud. You get that plus the rights to run 8 cores of capacity on-prem. So you can run your 8 cores of capacity in the cloud, and you can run your 8 cores on-prem. That does not have to be all on one server. You could have 2 4-core servers and scale it out. You could have uneven. You can have like one 4-core server, another 4-core server, and then an 8-core server, and buy 16 cores to cover it. So you can spread those cores however you like. The other way that you can license the capacity for Power BI Report Server is if you're already a SQL Server customer and you're running Enterprise Edition with Software Assurance. And Software Assurance is a great program that makes it sort of like a subscription. You pay for a 3-year period and then you renew, and it gives you a whole bunch of benefits. One of those benefits is it gives you access to new versions of the product when they come out. So it's like your cores, even though you bought SQL Server 2008, as long as you maintain your software assurance, when 2012 came out, you just got instantly upgraded to 2012. When 2016 came out, you got upgraded to 2016. So because of that benefit, if you have Enterprise Edition with software assurance, we're sort of giving you away the rights to use Power BI Report Server as if it were a new version of SQL, even though it's really not. So it's kind of a perk for existing customers who have the software assurance program. A lot of customers ask, OK, how many cores do I get if I have that? It's just like SQL. So you're consuming or you're allocating your SQL Server cores. If you bought 32 cores of SQL Server and you want to run Power BI Report Server on an 8-core server, then you take 8 of those 32 cores and you allocate it to this server, and you can run whatever SQL Server components you want on those 8 cores now. So that's how it works. That has you now licensed for the capacity for the server. And the additional requirement is that now you have a smaller number, generally a minority of your users, who are actually creating Power BI content, creating the reports in Power BI Desktop and publishing them. Those are your pro users. Those are the ones where you need to buy Power BI Pro licenses for them. Regardless of which way you license the capacity, you buy Power BI Pro licenses for them, and they now have the rights to publish to that report server. Everybody else who's just viewing the reports or doing other administrative tasks or whatever, or not doing content creation, they don't need pro licenses or any user-based licenses. They're covered by the capacity. Another couple common questions that I get would be, is there a trial of this? There is. There's an evaluation edition, just like there is for SQL Server. It's a 180-day trial, so after 180 days it expires, and you can upgrade. And also for dev test use, there is a developer version of this as well that you can install, and it doesn't consume your cores, but you're limited to using it for dev test purposes, not for production purposes. Okay. Power BI Premium, just to emphasize, those are not equal options. The SQL Server route only gives you the rights to run the on-premises server and nothing else, whereas Power BI Premium gives you this along with a host of other benefits. You now have dedicated capacity to use the Power BI service in the cloud. And the Power BI service in the cloud has a bunch of additional features. Power BI Report Server, hence the name, Report Server, focuses on the reports workload. Power BI Desktop file being a report, that's what it runs. You can think of that as the scope, the boundary of what runs in the report server. Dashboards, Q&A, machine learning features, quick insights, all these other cool things that we're adding, those are cloud features. So by getting Power BI Premium, you have access to those running in the cloud as well. Any quick questions here on the licensing part before I move on to functionality? Maybe just a few? Yep, you there. Yeah, so the question was, I don't need to have SSRS server and Power BI Report Server. That's right, because the Power BI Report Server is an SSRS server. Yeah, it's got that plus the additional feature of being able to run Power BI reports.
So can you run that in a PaaS implementation, so a platform as a service?
Can you run Power BI Report Server as a PaaS service?
Because I heard SSRS can't be ran in PaaS.
It wouldn't be considered PaaS, it would be considered IaaS, so infrastructure as a service. You get your infrastructure as a service as a VM in the cloud. You can bring your own license and run it on that. We don't offer it on an hourly basis, but you can bring your own license and install it on a VM that's running in the cloud if you like.
But
Sure.
if you wanted to go full PaaS and not have any
If you want to go full PaaS, then it's a service that's run by us, by Microsoft, then you're back to look at Power BI the SaaS service, which also is a PaaS service. You can use it. There's an embedded mode of it, and there are even embedded SKUs of Power BI Premium that you can buy. And then you've got a true PaaS service and more capabilities than you have in the report server.
Will that support SSRS?
That does not support SSRS reports today, but our vision is that we reconcile the report types between on-prem and the cloud, and so we've been looking at how do we bring SSRS reports to the cloud. Today, you're right, you have to go back to an IaaS solution at that point.
Do you know where it is, like how high up in the roadmap it is?
How high up it is on the roadmap? Pretty high. I'd love to tell you that it'll be done by Thursday, but I'll probably be off by quite a bit. Now, it's driven by customer demand, and so we're in the middle of a planning cycle right now, so we'll sort of, it remains to be seen. We'll see. People definitely want a lot more features for this too, so yeah.
Quick question on the licensing. That's Enterprise Edition of SQL Server, not Enterprise Agreement.
That's correct. It's Enterprise Edition of SQL Server. However, it's Enterprise Edition with software assurance, so at that point you're talking,
My current SSRS is Standard Edition, but I do have an Enterprise subscription agreement.
Right, so the Enterprise Agreement itself, if it's Standard Edition, doesn't get you that. You need Enterprise Edition with software assurance. Yep, question there.
So I know if I have Power BI Pro or Premium, I get access to the SharePoint web part to put it on the web page.
Yeah.
What does Report Server, does it give me the same capabilities?
The question was about a SharePoint web part to embed in SharePoint. We don't have a SharePoint web part just yet. There is an ability to take a Power BI report stored in Power BI Report Server, get the URL of it, append a parameter to the URL. It's called rs:\embed equals true, and it allows it to be embedded in an iframe. So within SharePoint, you could put it in a page viewer web part and embed it. The catch is,
There is a Power BI web part now. It's in first release.
yes, there is a Power BI sorry, I should clarify. We don't have a Power BI web part that works with SharePoint on-prem with Report Server on-prem. So there's a web part that works with SharePoint Online and Power BI SaaS in the cloud.
But it doesn't work.
But it does not yet work with this.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So you have to go to an iframe-based embedding, and then if it's all on-prem Windows auth, it might work. If you have other authentication discrepancies, then it becomes a little bit more challenging. So yeah. Maybe one last question, then I'll move on. We'll see if we have more time at the end. Yep.
If I'm doing the report server on-prem, do I need the Pro license for end users to export to CSV?
If you're doing Power BI Report Server on-prem, do you need a Pro license for users who are exporting to CSV? No. You need a Pro license. What makes a user a Pro is that they are creating a Power BI report and authoring it and publishing it to the server to be shared with other people. A user who's simply exporting the data to Excel or CSV is simply, that's part of consuming it and does not require a Pro license. Yeah. I'll just take one more if there was one on this side, because I feel like I've neglected this side a bit more. Yep.
So how are the monthly updates handled in the on-prem?
That's a great question. We'll get to that. Monthly updates, how does that work? Okay. All right, so let's look at Power BI Report Server from the end user's perspective. So if you take one thing away from this in terms of like what does the server actually do, like how is this different from publishing a Power BI desktop file to a file share or a SharePoint or something like that, this is what you should take away from it. The workflow is a business data analyst or some sort of power user creates an interactive report in Power BI Desktop. They can then publish that to Power BI Desktop. Publish that to Power BI Report Server. They can do that either directly from the desktop using a convenience feature that we have, or they can just go to the web portal and upload the file that they saved. Now that they've published it, they can make that file accessible to other end business users. And those business users, they can go to the Power BI mobile app on their phone. They can go to a web browser, or it might be in that scenario I mentioned, embedded in another application. And they can go and view and interact with that report on a mobile device or in a web browser. If you just put the PBIX file in a file share somewhere or in SharePoint or something, you don't have web and mobile viewing of Power BI reports. So this is specifically what the report server unlocks for you. So as a business data analyst, I can use Power BI Desktop. I can create these beautiful reports. It is something that we are delivering incrementally in terms of what we support on-prem. So in this release in June, and we'll talk about a next release in the not too distant future, this is really the first release where we unlock the ability to connect to analysis services, SQL Server Analysis Services or Azure Analysis Services. In the case of SQL Server, it can be tabular or multidimensional. So we have tons of customers on the Microsoft stack who are using Azure, who are using analysis services, and they have analysis services models. And they can go and connect on to any number of other data sources. They could be pulling in the data on a nightly basis, for example, or they could be running in a direct query mode where you're querying analysis services, but it in real time is translating those queries to your SQL data warehouse or Oracle data warehouse or what have you. So, but the requirement is that you have to have or you have to build one of these analysis services models. When you do that, that's what you can connect to from Power BI Desktop. It's similar to the way that business users have used Excel and pivot tables for a long time. Very often what IT and the BI professionals would do would curate the data into a cube, and then you connect from an Excel pivot table to that cube. And it's a lot more user-friendly to go and explore that than to be connecting directly to your data warehouse with millions of tables, for example. So that's what you connect to today. There are other data sources, of course, that Power BI Desktop can connect directly to for a more advanced business data analyst who can go and use the Power Query capabilities to go and import the data from a bunch of different sources directly. They don't need an analysis services model. They can mash it up. They can transform it. We support those in the desktop, but we don't yet support those connections in the report server. But we are targeting later this year to have an update pretty quickly that will extend support to all those additional data sources. And on the visual, that's on the data connectivity side. On the visual side, most of the visuals are already supported, all of the built-in ones and custom visuals. When we say custom visuals, we're usually referring to non-R-powered custom visuals. There's also something called R-powered custom visuals for data scientists, to use the R language to create visuals. We don't yet support those. And the other one that's notable is that we don't yet support ArcGIS visuals or Esri maps. Those are not supported yet. It's something, though, that we'd love to chat about with our partners at Esri. And so those are the sort of visuals that you can create in your Power BI reports. I mentioned that it's compatible with SSRS. And again, just to emphasize, that compatibility is complete. It is not, well, you can sort of translate your SSRS reports. Literally, you can take the SSRS reports that you have today, even if they're built on older versions, and you can deploy them or migrate them to Power BI Report Server, and they will work just fine. It's got the SSRS engine and is going to render them with full fidelity. So these, by contrast, are reports that you can use if you want to optimize for spitting out PDFs, or you need some business processes that require printed reports. So it's nice that the same server can do this. You can organize them all together. And you can share the infrastructure and compute costs across them. You can do things when we talk about these being paginated reports. You can have page headers, page footers, your page numbering. You control the logic of when you break from one page to the next. Very, very precise control over layout, over formatting. Again, the session that I did this morning shows you all of the complex things that you can do in Report Builder and in Visual Studio for SQL Server Reporting Services. All of that stuff works beautifully in Power BI Report Server. So once you've built your reports, what you can do, in this example we're showing Power BI Desktop, you can take your Power BI Desktop report, publish it up, and then you can organize them in your folder hierarchy along with your other reports. And there's even round-tripping capability. So imagine I publish a report, and then a week from now I want to make a tweak to it. I don't have to go back through some other source system or go digging somewhere for where is that report. The version that's in the web portal, that's on the server, that is like a master copy. I can directly go and open that back up from the web portal into Power BI Desktop, make my edit, and save it directly back. It can treat the report server like a file system. And then you can consume reports on the Power BI mobile apps, like I mentioned, in your web browser, or that's the URL parameter that I mentioned that you would append if you want to put this in an iframe. So with that, let's see a quick demo. Going to switch over to my computer here. If you want to try this really quickly, by the way, you can go to the Azure portal. That's portal.azure.com. And you can click New in the Azure portal and just search for Power BI Report Server. And you'll get a Power BI Report Server template come up. And this will spin up a fully functional, already set up, already configured Power BI Report Server for you, even with some demo content on there. If you have an Azure account, you're good to go. If you don't, you can sign up for a free one, and you get, I think, $200 of Azure credit to get started. So I know the irony of saying, hey, we have this on-prem solution, and the easiest way to go try it is to spin up something in the cloud. But it truly is. I mean, you don't need a server or anything like that. Of course, we do have a download as well. If you go to the Power BI website, you go to Products now, you'll see Power BI Report Server there now, and you click that, and you can download a free trial that you can install yourself. So up to you. Of course, when you put it in production, you'd be doing this on-prem, but to just get started, this is maybe the fastest way. And you can get a little bit of experience using Azure and Azure VMs as well. So that's what I did. I spun up an Azure VM. And so this is my Azure VM that'll show up here. And this is the Power BI Report Server web portal. So who's used SSRS 2016? OK, probably about half of the SSRS users. So if you have, this will be very familiar. And if you haven't yet, maybe this will be like, whoa, this doesn't look like SSRS at all. But this is kind of like what SSRS 2016 looks like. But of course, we rebranded it, Power BI Report Server. We've freshened up the look even a little bit more. The KPIs look beautiful. And so we have these key performance indicators here. These you can view on your mobile device as well. And then I've got some Power BI reports that I've created here. Now, what's really cool is that there's a good integration between the web portal and the desktop. So any business user who doesn't yet have the desktop, they can just go to Downloads up here and download the right version of Power BI Desktop. I already have mine installed. And once you've got it installed, you can even do things like this. You can say right from the web portal, you know what? I'd like to create a new Power BI Desktop report. And sure, I could go and launch the app from my desktop. But as a convenience feature, this is pretty cool. I can just click New Power BI Report. And it knows to launch Power BI Desktop. It's going to launch it from the web portal, which is kind of cool. So let me show you the experience of just creating a new simple report. I'm going to say Get Data. And I'm going to choose SQL Server Analysis Services. Again, you could use other data sources today, and they'll work in the desktop, but they won't yet work in the server. Later this year, we're going to light up all these other data sources. So I'll click Connect. And my server is just on the same machine because it's the Azure VM. And you want to make sure that it says Connect Live and not import the data. So I'm not trying to mash this up with other data sources. I'm just trying to do a live connection to explore the data. So I'll click OK. This happens to be a tabular model. It would work just as well with a multidimensional cube as well. Yeah. And there we go. So there's my tabular model. I'm going to choose this model here. I'll click OK. And then in the field list, I'll get all of my tables and fields in this analysis services model. And I'm going to start creating some data visualizations. So first, let me just grab a couple of key metrics. I'll grab the reseller total sales. I will make that a big number here. Put this over in the corner. Let me copy paste that. I want another one of these. But this one I'm going to make reseller total gross profit. There we go. So I got a couple key metrics at the top. Now let's create some charts. So here what I'll do is I'll grab my date dimension. Let's do a time series chart. And then I'll grab that reseller total sales and bring that into my values. Now we got a line chart. Actually, let's make it an area chart. Great. Now let's show the same thing broken down by geography. So I'm going to copy paste this so you can get a sense of what it's like to explore data in Power BI Desktop. And it's hopefully familiar to you if you've used Power BI Desktop before. I'm going to go to my sales territories and grab the sales territory country. Drop that in here. I'm going to get rid of my date. I want to show this as a map. And it automatically geocodes the names of the countries using Bing Maps APIs. So I've got my sales plotted by country. And then finally, let us break down by product category. So I'm going to do reseller total sales again. And then I'll go up to product subcategory. And I'll make that a bar chart. It's automatically sorted by my top selling category. So my top selling category here is road bikes, mountain bikes. This is just the AdventureWorks data if you're familiar with it. And so there, I've created a simple report. It's interactive out of the box. So if I go and click on one of these categories, it will cross-filter the other visuals. And so what I'm going to do now is just click File, Save As. And I can choose to save a local copy, maybe upload it to the report server later, or I can upload it directly to the report server. So I'll click Power BI Report Server. It shows me any recent servers that I've used, or I can just type the name in. This URL would be the same URL that I got in the web browser. If I were looking at the web portal, I would just copy paste it. I click OK. It's going to show me all the reports that are already on the server. I'll call this one Sales Report 2. Click OK. And it's saving this now directly to the report server, so no local copy. And it's got this helpful link that if I click there, it's going to take me right to the report server and load that report. So this is running, it's running in my Azure VM, but this could be running completely on-prem, and this is the experience you get. I see this, the screen resolution isn't perfect because of the projector, so you would normally have more screen real estate. But you could see this running in the Power BI Report Server web portal, all of the same interactivity, so I can still cross-filter, cross-highlight, all that stuff. And now what's really cool is I can say, let me close this. Imagine a week or so has passed, and I want to make a tweak to this report. I can just from here, also from the management page, but even from here, click Edit in Power BI Desktop. It's going to launch Power BI Desktop again. It's going to open the report. There's no local copy. It's just going to open it directly from the report server. And here, I'm going to say, what if I did this as a tree map? Let's do a tree map. And then the nice thing about a tree map is that I can import an additional field. So not only grouping by product subcategory, but also by the model name. I'll put that in details. Now we've got a nice tree map. I'm just going to click Save. It shows me in the bottom that it's saving it. Just like that, saved successfully. If I go back here, I'm just going to refresh the page. And there's my tree map now. All right, so pretty seamless interplay between the desktop and the report server. The last thing I want to show you is just some administrative stuff. So if I go back here, this folder hierarchy, I can create as many folders and subfolders and stuff as I want and group these reports. Here's that sales report I just created. If I right-click on here, I can go to Manage. And if I go to Data Sources, I can see the data source information that it connects to. I can manage this here without having to open up the Power BI desktop file again. And then I can actually manage how this report within the context of the server is going to authenticate when it connects to SQL Server Analysis Services, my data source. By default, it will just try and pass my identity to SQL Analysis Services. If these are on different servers, then you might know that you need to set up Kerberos constraint delegation, often called KCD, to make that work. If I don't want to do that, that does have its benefits. It's the most secure way to do it. It does allow you to do things like row-level security without additional sort of workarounds and impersonation. But if I don't, or my IT department has not set up Kerberos constraint delegation, then what I can do is I can just simply save my credentials in here, and it will connect as this user. If I still want to do something like row-level security, that's where I can check this box. And this box will say, use this credentials to log on to analysis services, but then connect as this trusted account that's an administrator, and then tell them who I really am. Tell them the name of the user that is really viewing this report, and we'll try and impersonate them in terms of which data they should see and shouldn't see. So those are some of the things that you can do on the data source connectivity. On the security side, this is just inheriting its permissions from a parent folder, but I can override it for even an individual report. And then here I can add another group or another user, and you'll see that it's a role-based security system. I can have people have the rights to simply view the report and not download it. I can have them have the right to download their own copy and then go and play around with it, but not necessarily override it. Or I could give them content manager positions that they can actually, permissions that they can actually go and override it. And this could be a user in Active Directory, or it could be a whole group of users in Active Directory. So familiar to SSRS users, but if you're coming from another system, then it's pretty flexible in terms of the permission model and pretty enterprise grade. So with that, let me switch back. So now that was a view of the business user perspective. Let's look at from the IT perspective. Some of the things to touch on would be, how do you install this? What if you're migrating from SSRS? What does that entail? How do you scale this? And how do I secure it? What if I want to expose this to mobile devices? What exactly would that look like? And then finally, somebody asked about the frequent releases, or when desktop is updating, how does this stay in sync? So let's drill into each one of these things. One of the things we're really happy about is that the installation experience in having this be a freestanding product that you can go and download from the web, we've decoupled this installer from the SQL Server installer. So there's a new lightweight installer. It's independent of the SQL Server installer, whereas that installer used to be a gigabyte or even 2 gigabytes. That'd be a hefty download for you to go and get. And imagine doing that on a frequent release cadence that every few months you'd be downloading this 2 gig file and trying to install that update. These were some of the reasons that played into us having a separate installer, as well as the fact that we're now able to release independently of SQL Server's release schedule. So a rapid release cadence was sort of the direction we were going for. You've got this lightweight download now. It's clocks in at 120 megabytes, so it's a 10th to a 20th the size of the previous installer. Really super lightweight. And because it is not part of the SQL Server installer, this actually isn't installing or messing with any SQL Server stuff. So we used to always get the question like, hey, SSRS 2016 is great, but my company isn't planning to roll out SQL Server 2016 for another 8 months or another year or whatever it was. I wish I could use it. And I'd have to try and beg with people to say, no, you definitely can use it. You can install reporting services independently of the database engine. But because they were both in the same package, both in the same installer, that was anything but obvious. And some people still had a mistrust of, well, it's messing with SQL Server files. So now you get this installer. It has nothing to do with SQL Server. It's not going to touch your SQL Server databases, your SSIS packages, ETL stuff. It is going to have zero impact on your SQL Server deployment. So they're totally independent. In terms of requirements, it's somewhat like the current version of SQL Server, though. You need Windows Server 2012 or later. It does not run on Windows Server 2008 R2. And there is a dependency on some SQL Server components. And that's just always been the case with reporting services and is still sort of the case today. So reporting services and now Power BI Report Server, they store the reports themselves, that file system, they store it in a database. They store it in a SQL Server database. So you need to have a database engine somewhere. When we talk to our customers, most of our customers, they're running on the Microsoft stack. They have a centralized SQL Server that they run, or they have several SQL Server instances that they run. So how many of you in your companies do you have SQL Server database servers somewhere? OK, so almost all of you. So you can probably just reuse that. When I used to do deployments for customers, that was the way that it usually went down, is that they said, don't install a new SQL Server. Here's the one I want you to use. Go and put the database here. So you can certainly do that. Or you can deploy it on the same machine as Power BI Report Server if you want an isolated single server environment. For reporting services and all of that traditional functionality, that's all you need. You're good. But for this release of the Power BI reports, since the only thing you can connect to directly is an analysis services model, everything's got to go through that before it connects to other data sources, you will need an analysis services engine somewhere as well. How many of you are using analysis services in your organizations? OK, I would still say about 2/3 of you. That's great. So again, if you already have that and it's 2012 or later, tabular or multidimensional, you can use that. Or you're welcome to set up a separate instance of it if you so choose. If you're migrating from SSRS, it's exactly like how you've migrated from SSRS from one server to another in the past. If you're familiar with that, you'll be familiar with this process. You just migrate the database. So that database that I just mentioned, you take a backup of it, you move it to your new hardware, or if it's on the same hardware, then you've already done that step. And then you install Power BI Report Server, and you use the configuration utility when you set it up to just point at that existing database rather than creating a new one. If you create a new one, you get a blank report server. You point at an existing one, and all of your reports light up. Now, very often things like connection strings and usernames and password and stuff, they're stored in that database encrypted. So what you need to do when you do the backup step is through the configuration utility, back up your encryption key. And then on the destination side, restore your encryption key. It's just an additional step you have to keep in mind. Database and encryption key. You back up and restore those two things, and you've done a migration. You can literally do this in like 5 minutes. From SharePoint mode, it's a little bit more complicated. So we no longer have this SharePoint integrated mode in the next version of reporting services. We no longer have it in Power BI Report Server. We're taking a more lightweight approach to SharePoint integration. So the way that you do it, you can't just take a SharePoint database and move it over to Power BI Report Server. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there, Excel workbooks, Performance Point, things that have nothing to do with BI, Word documents. And those don't quite translate over. So what you've got to do is you've got to pull the RDL reports out of there and put them in your Power BI Report Server. You can do that, of course, just sort of organically on a case-by-case basis. just by downloading the files if you don't need too many of them. If you need to do it as a bulk operation, there's some sample scripts available online that automate over the reporting services APIs that will pull the old stuff out and put it in your destination server. So there's a link in the deck for where you can get that sample script. You can scale it up and out. So you can, as many cores of processor power as you purchase, you can run that on as unlimited number of cores on your server. You can add more memory to your server. That doesn't impact the licensing. And then when it comes to scaling out, you can actually run Power BI Report Server in parallel, in tandem, on multiple servers. And then what you would do is you would use the scale out report server features to point them all at the same report server database. And for your users, you would put a load balancer in front of them. So you would get a high availability. You would get round robin divvying up of the load, however you configure your load balancer. What some customers will do also is they will specialize which sort of jobs run on each node, which you can do through the configuration file. So for example, you could say, one of my report servers is going to serve users who are at their screen running reports. I want them to have the best possible experience. The other report server, every night at 3 a.m., is going to be processing a big batch of documents that are then going to be emailed to people or dumped to a file share. I don't want that heavy burst workload to impact whatever users are using it at that time. So that's another way that you can do it as well. If you want to expose this to mobile devices, or you just want to enable something like multi-factor authentication, you can do that. It's not yet built into Power BI Report Server itself, but Power BI Report Server, we did do work so that it supports ADFS by way of something called Windows Server Web Application Proxy. So you set up Windows Server Web Application Proxy, and what its job is to translate from Active Directory Federation Services, ADFS, which is the thing that provides certificate login or fingerprint authentication or PIN or smart card or whatever it is that you're doing. And it will translate that to a traditional Windows or Kerberos token that reporting services understands. So you set up that web application proxy, and then you can securely expose this to non-domain joined devices like phones and tablets. And they'll see this experience where they're doing multi-factor auth, however your organization does it. But under the covers, it gets translated to something that the on-premises traditional report server understands. And we talked about the release cadence. So traditionally, we have released reporting services as a component of SQL Server, and that meant that we're shackled to the SQL Server database release cadence. And people don't upgrade their databases as often as they upgrade their BI. And so even now that we have SQL Server, there was a period between 2000 and 2005 when there were 5 years between major releases of SQL Server. So we certainly wouldn't want to go 5 years without any new Power BI desktop features, for example. It accelerated to 3 years, then it accelerated to 2 years. The last few releases have been about a couple years apart. And this year, with SQL Server coming out in 2017, just 1 year after the previous one, it is the first time we're going to release SQL Server within about a year of the previous version. And that's fantastic, but it still wasn't fast enough for us. We wanted to do something where we could release multiple times a year. So by decoupling from SQL Server, we're able to do exactly that. We plan to adopt what they call the modern lifecycle policy. And what it means is we're going to spend less time shipping a bunch of service packs that have lots of bug fixes but no new features, cumulative updates for 8 different versions of the report server. We're going to tailor to customers who are willing to keep a little bit more current because they want the latest and greatest features. So you can still get SQL Server reporting services in the traditional model. We ship it, and then we ship service packs for it, and you can run it for 5, 10, 15 years if you want. But if you want Power BI reports and the latest, greatest features with Power BI Report Server, we're going to ship it exclusively on this sort of cadence. We're aiming to release about 3 times a year, so that means roughly every 4 months or so. It's not exact, but roughly every 4 months or so, we're going to have another release. So imagine another release later this fall. And then each release that we ship, we will support it in terms of servicing it for a minimum of 12 months. So for that 12-month period, you're going to get security fixes if you want to stay on that version. There's 2 phases of that. The first phase is, this is the latest version that's out there in the market. We haven't shipped anything else next to replace it. If a security bug or any sort of critically important bug that can't wait till the next release a couple months down the road or 4 months down the road is discovered, then we will issue a patch. We will update that version. Once the next version comes out, All we want to do is make sure that the previous version is secure and doesn't have security vulnerabilities. If we discover a security vulnerability, we will fix it. Otherwise, all other bug fixes have gone into that next version. So as a customer, you want to be staying relatively current, but it's not as if every 4 months you have to upgrade. You can upgrade on your terms, on your time, anywhere up to that 12-month period. But that means you get the latest, greatest features. This is also, by the way, why it requires a subscription license or requires software assurance. That on the one hand is a requirement, but on the other hand is a huge benefit. It means that you get new features constantly. Each release of Power BI Report Server snaps to a release of Power BI Desktop. So while you could use a version of Power BI Desktop that's a little bit older and you'd be able to publish, or there are cases where there's some cross-compatibility, for the most compatible experience, what we recommend is that you deploy the matching versions of Power BI Desktop and Power BI Report Server. There's a mainline build, a sort of cloud update build of Power BI Desktop that we're all familiar with. If you go download it from the web, you're going to get a version that every month will prompt you to update Power BI Desktop. It's good for getting the latest versions of the cloud, but it does sort of compromise compatibility with a particular version that you're running on-prem. So what we offer now is we offer another build type of Power BI Desktop that is a deferred update version that has that prompt turned off. So your users will not get prompted to update every month. And in actual fact, when we talk to our enterprise customers, most of them, the end users, aren't admins on their machines. They can't install their own software anyways. So this is something that you would coordinate and push out to them, as you do lots of other software. So you would coordinate pushing out a version of the server and version of the desktop. Any quick questions before I show a quick demo of something? Yeah.
How's that going to work with freemium where I've got the cloud version marching on, basically, if I'm 2 releases back, stuff starts getting a little weird, on the desktop.
Yeah.
But if I'm only getting updates every 4 months,
Yep.
don't I run a risk where I'm going to run into issues with my cloud content versus my on-prem content?
Are you asking if you're using both the Power BI Report Server and Power BI in the cloud? Yeah, so you have a couple of different options depending on how often you're updating your Power BI Report Server. There could be a gap of as little as a couple of months, 4 months, versus all the way up to a year, right? The longer it is, more up to a year, the more likely it is that what you'll want to do is install both builds side by side. Now, and you can do that. If it's a smaller window and it's only like we're a couple of months off, you might find that you use the lowest common denominator of the two, and you don't have some features that have just been introduced last month, but otherwise you're in pretty good shape.
We just hit compatibility issues where sometimes something was working and now doesn't work the same way, or the other way around.
Yeah.
And usually if we stay within 2 releases of what's current, we're good. But
Yeah.
4 releases is
Yeah. And we're trying to improve our compatibility story, and at some point it's conceivable that I wonder if we can even sort of reconcile these into one version of the desktop with some greater tolerance for compatibility differences, but we are making improvements there. Yeah. Quick question?
Yeah, you mentioned data source limitations. So do you have to be query analysis services or tabular multidimensional, or can you query through SQL just standard SQL database?
In the June release, what you'll need to connect to directly is analysis services. That in turn can connect to SQL Server or other data sources, even in real time if you want. But not until later this year will you be able to connect directly from desktop to SQL Server, skipping the analysis services part. Yeah. Another question? Yep.
This might be a naive question. Can you configure this to run with SQL Express on a laptop just for demos and for development work?
Can you configure it to run with SQL Express? It depends what you mean. So can you query data that's stored in SQL Server Express? Yes. Can you run the report server database in SQL Server Express? No. One of the reasons is that the report server database also uses a SQL Server agent to do report scheduling, and that's not available in Express. Yeah. Question in the back?
So yeah, I was able to test the Azure VM for Power BI Report Server, and I found out that it's basically the same with the traditional reporting manager, right? And if you also said that it's almost the same with SQL 2016. So my question is that we consumers always wanted to have a better user experience, just like what we have in Power BI Web. Is there any plan that the Microsoft will introduce that also in Power BI Report Server?
It depends specifically on what you mean, right? So
Like dashboards. We don't have dashboard in Power BI Report Server, right?
That's a great segue. So no. So I mean, a couple of things would be, simply modernizing the SSRS report manager experience. We've done a lot of that already in 2016. We've done a little bit more in this release. And we're gradually going to take more and more cues from Power BI and modernize that experience. At the same time, our customers who are running on-prem are an existing customer base, and many of them like having the traditional folder hierarchy and the flexibility that it offers. And so we're sort of taking some cues from that and putting that in Power BI. If you notice what we're doing with apps and workspaces, that's been evolving. So they're sort of taking cues from each other, but we don't plan to move away from the traditional folder hierarchy because that's what our customer base is using today, and there's a compatibility issue there. In terms of features beyond user experience, something like dashboards, I will say that I don't think anything is ever off the table in terms of not being a valid point of customer feedback. So we're going to listen to customer feedback on that point, and we have several customers asking about which additional features would we bring to Power BI Report Server. But I think as the data connectivity point shows, we really want to round out the report functionality before we go dabble in other things. So we really want to go expand the data connectivity first, and then we can revisit where the customer feedback is on other features. But at a high-level strategy, it is Power BI Report Server. We didn't embark on taking the entire Power BI service and trying to box it up and run it on a server, because we are trying to innovate at cloud pace with the SaaS service. So this was the number one workload that customers want to run on-prem is the reporting. So that's what we brought on-prem. So that's sort of the focus of the server right now, hence the name of the server. Yeah. Any other questions? Sort of done my slides. I put this up here. It's in a blog post as well, but it's a really handy matrix that tells you what you have in Power BI Report Server versus SSRS, and what you gain by taking the next step up to the Power BI service. Yep.
You demoed how to be able to save directly. Is there some sort of like version control or someone to get back in case somebody screwed something up? Is there something built into that?
There's nothing built in terms of being able to roll back to an earlier version, other than if you're taking backups of the report server database, and you can roll back in bulk, but not granularly. So, I mean, the other thing that you can do in a less self-service sort of world is that you can not necessarily grant users rights to publish to certain folders. That can be the source of truth. They're publishing to some sort of intermediate location like a file share or SharePoint or something where you do have that version control, and then they get promoted to production, right? But it's a less self-service scenario.
So that promotion process, that would be an API you were saying earlier? Because what if they're segregated from networks, not even connected? You're able to extract from one and build a process to then import it to the next?
Yeah, there are some APIs to move some of that stuff across, but you touched on there being network segregation and stuff, so that really depends now on delving into the details of how that would work. Yep. Yep, question in the back there.
So how do the traditional SSRS security roles line up with the forthcoming role-based security that's coming this quarter in Power BI? Is there any planned alignment there? Or are they going to just be two mutually exclusive?
The role-based security, are you talking about row-level security or?
I'm talking about what they mentioned in the last session, that in the next quarter they're going to have role-based security in Power BI. I'm just trying to visualize how that's going to line up with the security roles I'm used to in SSRS.
Yeah, so they don't align completely, but they align in spirit, but they might not align in name, and some of the permissions don't translate because they have to do with RDL reports in particular. But generally, you have roles that, there's a role that's a pure read-only viewer who can't download anything. Then there's a role where there's some download capabilities, and then there's a role where you have what they call a content manager that you can actually edit files. But again, this is sort of we want to be compatible with our existing customer base running SSRS, and so we didn't change the roles or their meaning or their semantics. In Power BI, they're building something new, and they don't align 100%. Yeah.
So you don't know if those roles coming in Power BI are going to be supported if I deploy a tile to SSRS? Any insight into that?
Well, the cloud tends to be ahead of the Power BI report server. So if you're deploying a report to Power BI and then using a bunch of Power BI features that might be cloud exclusive, that doesn't necessarily translate back on-prem. The path that we optimized for was the opposite one. You start on-prem and it moves to the cloud if you like. Yep, question there?
You're talking about converting SSRS reports to like Power BI on-prem reports. And the question I had, is there any way to push a converted Power BI report up to the cloud service?
I think I was making the opposite point. So you cannot convert an SSRS RDL report to a Power BI report. They're very, very different types of reports. One optimized for on-screen interactivity, the other for PDF and print, is effectively. It's a simplistic way to think about it. So yeah, there's no conversion between the two. They can exist side by side, though, organized together, managed together in the same server.
Maybe I should rephrase my question.
Okay.
Is there any way to take the Power BI
Yeah, that touches on this gentleman's question earlier. Can you run an RDL report in the Power BI service? Not today. You would, if you want to run it in the cloud, you need to run it on an Azure VM or some sort of infrastructure as a service.
I'm just seeing it as a good solution for trying to get SSRS onto.
It is the best solution that we have today. If you want to run SSRS in the cloud, running this on a VM is the only way to do it. But yeah, so it's sort of a idea phase, exploration phase right now for us to do something more of a true PaaS service. So right now you run on a VM. Yep. I think we're maybe a couple more questions. Yep.
If you have a Power BI and also Power BI report server, do you need two desktop applications or one?
If you have Power BI, the cloud service, and Power BI report server, do you need two desktop applications or one? I think that's similar to this gentleman's question that if you can use the lowest common denominator version that works with your report server, and then you can still publish to the Power BI service. You just might not have some of the latest features that the Power BI service has that the report server doesn't yet have. Or, yes, you can have two versions and install them side by side on the same machine and use the latest, greatest features of both. So you have both options. Yeah. One more question. Yep.
You still have up to 50 different instances like you can with reporting services on the same server?
Can you still have up to 50 different instances of reporting services on the same server? That's a great question. In this new installation, we have not implemented multi-instance, so you can only have one instance on the machine. If you need to go beyond that, you need to virtualize at the VM level. So we're really curious to see if we get customer feedback on customers using multi-instances, and if so, why. But at this point, that's a limitation. Yep. Okay, I know there are lots of questions, although nobody's... I mean, I'll answer questions until they kick me out. Are we at that time? Sure, why don't we do that? I'm going to pack up, and then you're welcome to come up and ambush me, and I'll answer as many questions as I can. Thank you very much.